Alec Wesleyan, the music librarian and director of the World Music Archives at Wesleyan University, who will be speaking about The Music Never Stopped, the Grateful Dead at Wesleyan. Thank you.
Thanks. This is actually part of a presentation that from last year's Wesleyan reunion and commencement that I gave along with our university archivist, Leith Johnson. Leith provided the narrative history of this event, and I presented the details of the audio and video recordings that were made at the time. So the event is a concert by the Grateful Dead in Wesleyan's Andrews Field on May 3rd, 1970. 3 days after President Nixon's announcement of the incursion into Cambodia, dramatically widening the scope of the war in Vietnam, 1 day before the killing of 4 students at a Kent State University protest to that incursion, and in the midst of the criminal trials of several members of the Black Panther Party in New Haven. The class of 1973, who were celebrating the 4th reunion last year, were freshmen at that time. So they were, Leith and I briefly spoke about how we probably could have had better timing. We probably should have had it a few years earlier when we would have had some upperclassmen in that group that were celebrating their 40th, and they would have been more involved in organizing the event. But nonetheless, it was very well received. So I'm sort of doing double duty. I'll give a little bit of a narrative history, but I want to focus mostly on the recordings we have. For me, the relationship between the concert itself and the particular political events of the time is less important in the wider context of the general social movement that was the counterculture and its relation to musical and political events, and how this played out and was observed and documented on the college campus. As we'll see, the documentation was often comically inept and disorganized, and tracking it down has often been an exercise of frustration. Speaking of comedy, I'll start with this memorable clip, and I'm tempted to say, stop me if you've heard this one, but if I did, I'd never play it because I think you probably all seen it. So.
Thank you. Right now, the University of California at Santa Cruz is offering over $68,000 with a brand new Grateful Dead archivist. Here's what they're saying. They're looking for someone who loves the Grateful Dead, yet somehow also has exceptional organizational skills. I don't know how they're going to make this. Basically, UC Santa Cruz is saying, I need a miracle. By the way, if you love the Grateful Dead and you have a bachelor's degree in archives management and you think that going out there and getting this job would be a slam dunk, think again. The university requires that you have a master's degree in archives management. A master's degree in archive management? What does that even mean? A master's degree. I can archive things alphabetically or numerically. What? Alphanumerically? Slow down. I don't have a doctorate. There you have it. 4 years of undergrad, 2 years of graduate school, and now you can spend your days picking blotter acid out of Phil Lesh's underwear from the Blues for Allah tour.
Some of us may have seen the talk at last year's NEMLA by Nicholas Merriweather, the archivist who filled this unfillable position, and know that he's clean-cut, scholarly, and a true deadhead. And incidentally loves this clip. And I like John Stewart in general, but I think that you'll agree that he gets 2 things wrong here. In addition to his very sketchy understanding of what archivists do, I think he also gets deadheads wrong. I can't claim to be one myself. Unlike Jerry Garcia said, the Dead are kind of like licorice. Not everyone likes it, but if you do, you like it a lot. I think I'm like a lot of librarians. I like them a little, but I do like them. But I'm not a deadhead. And in working on this project, I have found that they are nothing if not skillful at organizing and preserving cultural history, with an attention to detail that would amaze many professional archivists. I'm particularly indebted to one who identifies himself as light into ashes, and frequently posts on Dead blogs. His encyclopedic knowledge of which songs were played at which concerts and the order songs might have appeared on concerts have helped me answer many of the questions I've had about our own recordings. Furthermore, he has contributed a lengthy essay of the Wesleyan concert with much more detailed history than I would care to include here. And if you are interested in this, just try Googling Wesleyan Grateful Dead 1970 and it will come up. So, in the fall of 2012, Nick Palmgarten came out with this article in the New Yorker magazine focusing on the Dead's music and its preservation. And he made this very interesting observation about the proliferation of the group's musical recordings, concluding that it's probably safe to say that the Dead have more recorded music in circulation than any performing group in history. The title of this talk is the same one we used at the commencement last year, and it's an attempt to reflect the fact that 40 years later we're still listening to these recordings. The Dead just won't go away, it seems. It also seems there's a renewed academic interest, and I think that the position of Nicholas Merriweather is one example, the article by Nick Palmgarten, and Wesleyan last spring had a visit from Graham Boone of the Ohio State University, a musicologist. He was invited by the chair of our music department to deliver an analytical talk on the collective performances of Dark Star, using the model of a mandala to illustrate his analysis. And I will point out, when I mentioned this at the commencement last year, I got a big belly laugh from the audience. So anyways, so let me begin with a condensed narrative history of this event, and then we'll get to the recordings. So the planning for the concert went back a couple of months, and this particular article mentioned some problems with coming up with money. They intended an outdoor concert that was open, and so it had to rely entirely on student funds because they couldn't sell tickets. And this comes up actually when I play a clip. I'm going to talk a little bit about the problem paying them, possibly, we don't know. And so we had several clips in the Wesleyan Argus, a student newspaper, listed Dead. And then as the weekend approached, we have Thursday the announcement of the incursion into Cambodia, and then on Saturday the protests in New Haven over the Black Panther trials. And that was a weekend of quite a few bands that played at Wesleyan. They were already scheduled to play, nothing to do with any kind of politicizing. And then finally, this is a clip from the Sunday of the concert. Sunday afternoon began with rain, but by the time the music began around 3 p.m. it had cleared some. No members of the Dead were in sight, so several local bands, beginning with Swamp Gas, played for around 2.5 hours. It's a Middletown band. Played for around 2.5 hours, followed by a hiatus during which Wesleyan students milled around and gave an impromptu kazoo band performance. At that point, a bus drove up, and eventually Jerry Garcia and Bob Weir emerged to play an acoustic set of 4 songs as a duo, pictured here. Around 8 p.m., the New Riders of the Purple Sage, having just begun to tour with the Dead, played a set of 5 songs, followed by the full Dead set a little after 9 p.m. and finishing up at 11. By which time the more politically active students were ready for a meeting in the chapel to call a student strike in protest of the invasion of Cambodia. So on to the main topic here, I think, which is the recordings themselves that we got. Our audio recording has been considered by some, and has been considered by me now affectionate, to be one of the worst audience recordings of a Grateful Dead concert ever made. The concert itself is relatively unmemorable in the general canon of Dead concert. But what's perhaps most interesting for me is the pursuit of the recording's various manifestations and discovering why they were made, since it reveals a lot about the Wesleyan environment at the time. In December of 2012, David Lemieux, the official archivist for the Grateful Dead, contacted us after discovering that an audio recording of the concert was in our library catalog. And in addition, we had a video recording listed in a special collections archives media collection finding aid. Audio recordings of this concert were in fact already available at the Internet Archive, a repository abundantly used by Grateful Dead fans. But our catalog indicated tracks from the Wesleyan concert that had not been seen anywhere else. At this point, I was aware that there were copies of the concert at the Internet Archive that hadn't done a track-by-track comparison. And so, with the help of a grad student who knew the Dead well, I went through our copy and discovered that these extra tracks came at the tail end of the tape and didn't seem to be from the same concert. Clearly our recording, in passing through the hands of many deadheads, had tracks appended to it, probably to fill out space in the tape. We had acquired our copy on cassette sometime in the 1990s from a Middletown resident named Jim Hale, but little was known about the origin of that tape or the donor. You'll notice it says 4 tape reels. We actually, I think the cassette was made into 4 tape reels of 7.5 IPS. So that became our kind of master copy that way. And the tracks in dispute here, or in question, are the last 4. Dancing in the Street, Deep Ellum Blues, Cumberland Blues, Black Peter, that never actually were played at that concert. They ended up being appended to the cassette somehow. And true to his nature, my good friend Light into Ashes found out exactly what concert they were from. They were from the Fillmore West about 2 weeks earlier. Thus was born our quest. What could we find out about who made these audio and video recordings? Since when you had asked for a copy of the video, it made it imperative for us to find out who actually filmed the concert in order to get permission to honor his request. Now, the Internet Archive contained several reports about who had, from people who had disseminated the audio recording at various stages. And the most interesting reports were these 3 claims: that it was recorded by somebody named Warren White for a class taught by a Professor Schenck on a UO reel-to-reel tape recorder owned by sociology professor Charles Lemer. And so 2 of these were written on the tape box, which I've never seen, and the third was sort of vague personal communication. So it's nice, you work with us so you can track these things down, and so I was able to put to rest some of these. So the very first one, or I'll start with the last one first. Charles Lemer didn't come to Wesleyan until 1982, so that would be very unlikely that he would have been the source of that. But to everything like this is a grain of truth. Lemer taught a course called the 1960s when he came to Wesleyan, and a Wesleyan student from class of 1985 named Peter Braverman managed to cajole him into loaning him the tapes, which were sitting around the sociology department. He made copies. I've been in touch with Braverman on the telephone, and he considers himself a true deadhead and probably is responsible for the proliferation of most of the copies of this concert, largely on cassette. I think he just ran off cassette after cassette and gave them to all his friends. So there's a possibility there, but still nothing to do with Charles Lemer making it. The second, the second one also had a lot of problems. There never was a Professor Schenck who ever taught this. This is a mysterious one, and I can't really tell you anything for certain. There was an admission at the Internet Archive that it was difficult to read the tape box. And there is an emeritus professor who's still very active in Middletown, Carl Scheibe. And I talked to him about this, and he said, no, he had nothing to do with the Grateful Dead concert, but he did own 2 UR tape recorders. And I said, is it possible that you had your name on a tape box and someone reused the tape at one point? He said, yeah, that's certainly possible. So but somehow, somewhere there is a tape box floating around with these on. And then finally, this question of who recorded it. And this is a mystery still. And I'm going to come back to this, actually. This is quite interesting. So, okay, well, this question about recording for a professor, it did acquire some credibility when I came across this article from the student newspaper, The Argus, that appeared a few days after the concert. Apparently, Professor Philip Ennis, identified there in the first sentence, of the sociology department, did have a project where he recruited students to go around and take notes and to record, and I think it mentions film and audio. So in any event, and all for the purpose of studying crowd behavior at rock concerts. So whatever was written in the tape box, clearly if there was a professor in question, it was Ennis, not Schenck, whoever Schenck was. So it still, returns us to this question, who actually recorded it. We appeal to the Wesleyan alumni list for any students who were involved in this data gathering project, produced lots of anecdotes and fond memories of being there, but no one who actually went into recording or conducting interviews. Now, Ennis passed away in the 1990s, but of course there was Warren White himself. So, class of 1971, I found him in the alumni book and contacted him. I found him easily, but received a puzzling denial. While he was indeed at the concert, he didn't remember recording it for him. Further questions revealed that he knew who Ennis was, but didn't have any dealings with him. Now, it might be guessed that this is part of the same name on the tape box error, but in fact, I suddenly discovered something remarkable, was that his name on the tape box actually comes from the fact that whoever was making the recording was actually addressed by name on the tape itself, Warren White. And this comes, as close as possible to a smoking gun, but still, it's a mystery.
Smoking for sure.
Yes. Well, it's hard to believe that he actually forgot about doing it, considering he remembered Professor Reynolds. So this is a line of inquiry that I'll just have to leave alone. There's always a possible misidentified student, and I think that's very real. By this time, he'd also managed to track down Philip Ennis's son, Michael, who reported a tape box in his attic labeled Grateful Dead 1970. He also regretted very much to tell us that there may have been several folders labeled field notes that he had unthinkingly thrown out. We acquired from him the tape and digitized it with some loss of fidelity because it had made it at 15/16 inches per second, and we could only digitize it at 3 3/4 and then half the sample rate. But nonetheless, it was not the great find that we were hoping. There were no additional tracks from the new writers of the Grateful Dead, but it did contain the 2.5 hours of warm-up bands that the earlier recordings had missed, the one we had in the not there yet. And in my mind, I'm pretty certain that that is the original tape, the one that Michael Ennis gave us, because the original notes that the student made, and I'm going to show you some scans of them, were folded up inside. Clearly the original paper, not photocopies. And in fact, the way the notes are, it could only have been recorded in order to fit all this 2.5 hours on one side of the tape at 15/16 inches per second. And it appears that that was the speed of the tape, and all the other reports of copies that were made were from 1 7/8 inches per second. So I think that actually is the original, which is sort of interesting. Just so we have it, we finally found the original. Still didn't answer the question if we made the video, but it was also through the discovery of a name mentioned in the recording that I was able to track down the students responsible. Randy Lockwood, class of 1970, Kim Long, class of 1971. And that also brought out the surprising revelation that the professor behind this particular project was not Ennis, but Trent Sorensen in the psychology department. Sorensen had also been interested in crowd behavior, and in addition to directing Lockwood and Long to make videos of the crowd watching the concert, he had set up a camera on the roof of one of the nearby buildings to document large movements of people. This film has apparently not survived, and quite possibly was not even made in the first place, through a bit of the comic ineptness mentioned earlier. It's not entirely clear what happened, but it's worth a mention that all the recordings we have maybe, or of dubious quality, may be partly because those charged with making them were a little bit too swept up in the event itself, and all that was available for them to partake of in order to So let's turn to the concert itself and detail the various versions of the existing recordings, and that's my next slide here. Before this, actually, I will note, and you'll see it reflected here, there are two other recordings that we're aware of, but we have no idea where the origins are. To begin with, on the far left, there are some brief excerpts of color film with crowd shots only that made it into a student film project from 1975 called Beyond the Wizard of Oz. And we have seen that. There's a copy of it in the cinema archives, but we don't know where it came from, actually. And additionally, and actually more significantly, there is audio towards the middle. There were a set of 4 tracks from the acoustic set played by Garcia and Ware have been posted to the Internet Archive, yet mistakenly attributed to a concert 1 week later at Worcester Polytechnic Institute. And I owe this discovery entirely to our friend Light Into Ashes, who heard about these recordings. He's not seen the video. Some friends came into the library and watched the video, reported back to him. He said, "Oh, I know where those are from." And he went and listened to both, and he said, "No, those are the ones at Worcester Polytech that are on the Internet Archive, are the ones from Wesleyan, because they match the ones in the video." Particularly revealing is a spoken introduction by Ware and Garcia that refers to coming to Wesleyan from upstate New York. And that appears in both the video and the Worcester Polytech attributed audio. And I'll show you a clip of the video in a minute. And here are the, sorry, I'm going to back up a second. So just to recap here, you have the unknown color clips from the film, and then the video that we do have that I'll show you bits and pieces of. So that now is in Wesleyan Special Collections and Archives. That was found in a closet in the old AV, which became Information Technology. Just someone found it and gave it to the library, and we managed to get it transferred. On the old 1-inch Sony Portapack, that was the recorder. And then the audio, we have the WPI, which we don't have the originals of. We only know that they're at the Internet Archive. And then essentially two versions that were done by Warren White or whoever for Professor Ennis. The one that Peter Braverman got hold of and distributed via cassettes. We got that, which include the miscellaneous tracks from the Fillmore West concert that no one else seems to have in their copy. And then finally the Michael Ennis copy, which we got directly from Michael Ennis. It was in the attic at the Philip Ennis Society. And that's essentially our copy too, but I think that's the original. And then this is also kind of an interesting, and these will get posted hopefully in the NEMLA stuff, because I think it's worth looking at some of these if you're into the Grateful Dead songs and concerts and how they. So this is what is and isn't on every copy. The video we have just has two songs from the acoustic set. The one in the Internet Archive attributed to Worcester Polytech has 4 of them. So the video recorders were very selective. They just kind of turned it on for a little bit and then off. When the New Riders came on, they only got 3 of their songs, but if you look at the one that came from Peter Braverman, which I call the long Wesleyan audio, they have 5 of the songs there. And then when the Electric Dead started to play, for some reason the video and audio don't overlap. And this is a little bit of a mystery. Our friend Warren seems to have missed a good part of the first part of the Dead. So we know there are at least 3 songs because they're on the video. And that row of question marks suggests that there's 1 or more missing. And again, Light into Ashes has told me, yes, there's got to be. They wouldn't have played those in that order. And he speculated that maybe Casey Jones was one of the songs that was performed them. The 3 asterisks are my guess that those 3, Hard to Handle, China Cast, Summertime, and I Know You Rider, are actually, on our video, are probably the only existing copies of that concert, those songs at that concert. That is, there's no audio recording anywhere of those. So if you're a deadhead, you're interested in that, to know that. So people are going to watch the video. It's a decision. It's not in my hands, fortunately. Okay, so before I want to play some clips. How are we doing in time?
3:13. About 10.
Okay, good. Right. Just a couple of things. There are several questions. Were Sorensen and Ennis working together, and if not, where are the, quote, several faculty and 15 students that the Argus reported? Was it, in fact, a much smaller operation than the Argus suggested? Voices on the audio tape suggested that 3 people were involved, Ennis and Warren, and then a third person who returns later to check on Warren. It was not Ennis. And Michael listened to the voice and said, no, that's not his father. It was somebody else, somebody younger. Those involved in the video, including several who were close to Sorensen, believe it was his project alone. He very sadly passed away in the 1970s, not too long after this concert. And Ennis, who passed away in the 90s, his book published in 1992, titled The Seventh Stream, The Emergence of Rock and Roll in American Popular Music, contains only a single reference to this concert, just in 1 sentence. So clearly whatever data was gathered was never used in any significant way. And another question, why were so many Dead songs missing on that? Oops. That comes next. Yeah, why were so many Dead songs missing on the recordings? And here it's a little hard to read. It's kind of a mess. This is our students' handwriting, the original notes here. And one thing you can see is that where it says down here in the middle of the left, 8:55 end, that actually is the end of this side 1 of the tape. And that went all the way up to all the warm-up bands plus New Riders. And And he misidentifies the duo as Phil Lesh and Jerry Garcia up there. It's definitely Bob Weir because we have the photos and the video of it. And then side 2, he turns the tape over. But did he forget to turn the tape over, and did he just let it stop and forget? You know, he missed a lot of songs that fortunately came out of the video. And notice also, you know, our recorder is not very swift. He doesn't really know the Grateful Dead. And at one point, he actually asks a neighbor, "Do you know these songs? I don't know the names of any of them." And he just writes down numbers. "Turn on your love light" was, I could probably announce from the stage, so he knew that. But, so at any rate, and he makes announcements periodically. Okay. Well, I'm going to sort of brush over this. Sorry. Briefly, this is a question. You know, can we disseminate these recordings? Well, everyone says, of course. The Grateful Dead said any audience recording can be disseminated. But that means if you make your own recording, you could disseminate it. What about someone else's recording if you don't know who it was? And I think that's been our hesitation about the video that was made by someone who we didn't know initially. And you don't just go distributing recordings that someone else made. And so there actually is, you know, any recording is the property of the intellectual property of the composer of the music, but also the property of whoever made the recording. So until we get permission from the students who made them, you know, we don't want to just give them out. Of course, the audio made it to the Internet Archive anyways. And we got to the point where we were just making CDs from our own copy and letting students check them out to burn them because they wanted that. But the other issue, I think, is that it's a little bit like, does the crappy paper you wrote in a philosophy class as a freshman, should that be all over the internet? Whether or not, I mean, and doesn't maybe the right to distribute and to claim authorship also include the right to not distribute at all and deny authorship? And I think that may be the issue with our poor student Warren White, and that's why I'm not going to bother him anymore. It's entirely possible that he's just had it up to here with people criticizing the recording. And in fact, there's abuse on the Internet Archive. You go there, it's actually obscenity-laden abuse about the person recording it who screwed up this concert. So I have a little bit of sympathy for him, and that's part of this I'd like to mention. Anyways, so I'm going to play just a couple of audio here. Just see if we can get some of this.
Now plug into, yeah, there you go.
I can sort of talk you through this.
You can keep up a conversation.
Testing as a young student.
Okay.
Second and first round.
Okay. Here's your talk over it whenever you want. It'll come through.
Okay. Good enough.
Warren, I'll be at 264 Court Street.
Okay, I'll be trying to see it in like this evening.
Was in fact
No one's there, leave it downstairs. I'm on the second floor.
Leave it away?
Not on the downstairs.
Okay, good.
and listen to the announcement from the stage.
Oh, he's there? What's that?
We will work on this. Mr. Pettis.
Briefly, the three demands are: free all political prisoners, stop the war and start the and stop university complicity in the war. Okay, Tony!
So let me just then the first band, which is the local band.
This is the year after Woodstock.
Probably just ask his neighbor what time it was. So he's supposed to report the time that he doesn't even know how to. So, 3 o'clock. 10 to 3 it starts. And by the time the dead jump to this,
Time is 9:34.
So anyway, hold on, I want to do some video. So let me close this. Okay, this is terrible quality, but I'm going to jump to. Revolving blue screen, or revolving beach ball of death.
Yeah.
Jeremy and Bob Weir are here and they're going to do some acoustic stuff until Phil gets here in a few minutes. Jeremy and Bob Weir, Jerry Baxter and Bob from the Grateful Dead.
Let me explain this to you really briefly, that being that Phil and Mickey and a few others are still, I think, en route somewhere in the upstate New York.
They're making a speech. Down the road of peace.
A few coaching comments.
I'm going to let it go and talk over this a bit. Those comments were very significant, I think. Least, when he was doing some information gathering, had an interview with someone who claimed he was part of the organizing committee, that in fact they were not on their way from upstate New York. They were holed up in a motel just a bit down the road, arguing about whether to go on because Wesleyan hadn't yet paid. That is, the students hadn't come up with the money. That little interjection by Garcia when he says, yeah, they're making the speech down the road a piece, and then Ware says, yeah, cogent comments, suggests that that may in fact be true. We didn't actually believe that, but when I listened to this again, I think it's highly likely that that's what happened. Eventually they came to some agreement about it, but very likely Garcia either just wanted to go and play no matter what. I can sort of imagine it like that. Or he said, okay, we'll go play, you guys figure it out, make your speeches, etc. So, thank you.
I think while our next presenters are setting up, we may have time for one question. So make it a good one.
Actually, I have a question this
Yes.
crowd might like, Alec. I know that in deadhead culture there was this tradition of bringing your own blank media to concerts and recording from the board,
Yes, right.
which surely resulted in
Yes, and I didn't actually go
recordings.
into that, thank you. There is no
where are
known
those?
soundboard recording from Wesleyan.
What's that?
There is no known soundboard recording from Wesleyan, and people have asked about that. Some people suggested that the ones that were attributed to Worcester Polytech were soundboard, but others said, no, they're not good enough.
So that wasn't, because I thought that was something that was done at almost every Dead show, so you would think that...
I think it depended who was there to do it.
Oh.
And it depended on the setup, the technical setup. All of that was important, I think. And I think it just wasn't there. So yeah, but that's, in fact, the distribution of Grateful Dead recordings actually only cover that is, that permission only covers the audience ones. The Dead do not give permission to have their soundboard recordings distributed. And I think it's because they actually reneged on it. They said everything and then they went back on it and suggested just the audience recording. And I think there was a thought they wanted to actually distribute the soundboard recordings themselves.